For a very short time, I worked on a few commercial sets, starring the likes of... You ready for some name dropping? I worked on a few sets for a few days on which the key talent was Jessica Alba and Jessica Biel, and a couple of other top-tier actresses. And today, I'm just going to jabber at you about one of those shoots, because it's Christmas, and settling in for a little story time is just what I need. My sincerest apologies if that's not what you need. Greetings, good humans, and welcome to Tabletop Alchemy, where sometimes it's story time, and sometimes it's an episode to listen to in the background while you hobby, because it has very little to do with anything actually hobby-related. But it does fit our apparently photography-themed December. And we thank our patrons for sticking through and supporting such a wild momentary shift in topics in the Alchemist Lab. And the Alchemist Lab? And the Alchemy Lab. I suppose they're both valid. Anyway, we're all here together, so... let me just babble on. First off, let me apologize for the nonsense construction noise outside. I tried to avoid that, but they refused to take a vacation. Now, I've got two tales to tell from this brief section of my day job career, but the first has a much more universal and applicable anecdote we'll explore in another video down the line. Today's story is the second, and really only about one key detail that will open up some relevant discussion, maybe, regarding technological progress and creative endeavors. So, I don't remember what year we did these jobs, but it was probably around 2006 or 2007. My buddy was producing some behind-the-scenes stuff for television commercial shoots for cosmetic companies like Revlon and Maybelline, and he hired me on as a camera operator for a couple of those, and this particular one I think was a Maybelline shoot. I think. It might have been for All May, but no. I think it was a mascara shoot. Anyway, the model in this particular commercial spot was John Cougar Mellencamp's wife, Elaine Irwin. Now, I was not on the official crew or anything like that. In fact, it was kind of cooler than that, barring being on the camera crew, of course. But my job was to run around with my Panasonic HVX 200, which was one of the first prosumer cameras to record full 1080p HD on solid-state media and capture cool B-roll of whatever was going on. The house the production had rented was amazing, of course. I mean, when your budget for a one-day shoot is upwards of $1 million, I guess you're gonna get a cool location. Now, here's a weird aside. I've never had as gourmet a lunch as I had from the lunch trucks on those shoots. I'm not kidding. The lunch plate was a shock. This is back before taco trucks became the culinary sidewalk wonderlands they are today. Like, you know, before the movie Chef came out and before taco trucks became synonymous with, you know, evenings out at craft breweries, that sort of thing. On a normal shoot, at least back then, you'd head out to the meal truck when lunch was called, if your production even had a meal truck show up, and everyone goes to stand in line for their, you know, typically you'd have a choice between like a hefty breakfast burrito or a decent tuna melt on sourdough toast or something like that. So when we go to lunch on the first of these commercial shoots I worked on, I'm just expecting the typical paper plate holding a burger or something like that, right? But then I get up to the ordering station and I see this menu with filet mignon on it and like crab cakes and lobster. And I'm looking at my buddy like, what the hell's going on? He just grins, and when we get up to the window to place our orders, I can see there's like this fancy chef guy in there plating stuff like he's in a 5-star restaurant and not really inside a taco truck. And then when I get my lunch, it's on a ceramic plate and it's got little colorful sauces drizzled all over it and swirly designs and artfully placed asparagus, and it was just sort of mind-blowing. And of course, very, very good. I don't know what it's like now, but back then, television commercial jobs were where everyone made real money. Like, you'd work for a day or two and make as much as you would normally make for like a week on a narrative project. In other words, nothing's changed. Advertising is always where the money is. But anyway, back to the production. So, they've rented this house up in the Hollywood Hills. It's up there in those spiffy neighborhoods above the Greek Theater and the Hollywood Bowl. It's a pretty spectacular location. Nowadays, I think a house up there goes for probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $10 million, depending on the size and the view. Could be more, but definitely not less. One thing I've never forgotten was, upon first entering the place, noting that the floor was entirely poured from that epoxy composite stuff high-end countertops were made of back then. I don't know why I remember that. It just struck me as expensive. And there was a lot of floor. But anyway, we break out our cameras and we start shooting. I'm grabbing B-roll of all the activity, like Elaine in makeup. Grips putting up flags and silks, electricians putting up lights, stuff like that. Camera crew building the camera, dolly grips setting up the Chapman dolly, all that stuff. Eventually, they start shooting. And we're a few hours in, and the director has Elaine moving around this living room, and he's telling her to dance and do all these different little moves and twirl this way and fling her dress out. And there was a lot of dancing, I remember. Now, I don't know who the director was. He was probably a TV director. I didn't recognize him. But at one point, the ad agency people kind of pull him off to the side and they start arguing because he's shooting all this random stuff and he's been doing it for like an hour and a half. And this stuff was apparently not in the brief nor the storyboards. And the ad reps are like, hey, we need you to shoot what we need for the commercial, right? All this stuff he was having the model do was apparently completely unnecessary. At one point, the entire crew has just stopped working. We're just sort of standing around while the director and the ad reps duke it out. I remember the director being just kind of whiny and yelling a lot in a high-pitched voice, and the ad reps just being very unhappy. So anyway, we're standing around, we're waiting, and they finally move on to getting the next scripted shot. And this is what was to me the coolest thing I remember about that day. So this house is one of those houses that extend out over a hillside, right? So it's partly on stilts. And there's a living room type space that's projecting out into empty space. And it's got windows on 3 walls, all with floor-to-ceiling glass. So you get this really epic sort of 360 view of Hollywood and downtown Los Angeles, just the whole area. So I know they're setting up for a shot. I just don't know what the shot is. Now, this commercial was for some kind of eye makeup, probably mascara. Anyway, so I'm shooting the crew set up like this nice leather chair near one of the windows. And it's got this kind of crazy device on it. They set this thing on there that kind of looks like a cross between the medical or dental apparatus and camera equipment. And they're putting this big lens on the camera, which is over there on the other side of the room. And they fly in this other model. Flying in just means they brought her onto the set, by the way. She's blonde, but doesn't really look like Elaine Irwin. In fact, she doesn't even really look like a model. But her eyes are all like super made up, right? And she sits in the chair and leans her head down into this crazy cradle thing. And then the DP, the director of photography, he has the camera brought over on that crab dolly and raises the camera up on the little jib arm and tilts it down and starts to frame the shot. So the woman is laying like sideways in this chair, her head tilted over and, into this cradle thing that's holding her head. And the camera's angled down at her face. And now on the video assist screens across the room, we can see what the shot is actually going to be. And when I realized what they are doing, I was like, oh man, this is freaking cool. So the model turns out to be specifically an eye model. And the lens is a macro lens. And they're using this chair rig to keep the model's head and face positioned exactly right without her being able to move. I mean, she can still get up out of the chair. She's not strapped down, but I mean, her head won't like wobble or anything. It's like resting in this spot. Because on a macro shot like that, any movement is going to wreck your focus and your frame. Because the shot is framing up just like one of her eyes, basically. So, the detail that this whole setup turns out to be for, the reason they had it all rigged like this, was they were getting an image of the downtown Los Angeles skyline reflected in her eye. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. I mean, come on. Setting up a chair next to the window and the macro lens and all to get this reflection in an eyeball. I mean, it was pretty spectacular looking, the shot, because it's a macro shot and we're zoomed in, the eye is huge on screen, right? And you can see all the buildings. Anyway, but of course, nowadays, no one would ever do anything like that. You just do it digitally and you do it in like 5 minutes, which brings us to the point I wanted to talk about. We are living in what a lot of us old fogies would call the future, because we grew up, without the internet. So now, if I can just go to Midjourney, or any other generative AI, and type in a prompt to get a super cool, badass, artistic looking image in 20 seconds, why did I bother spending a bunch of hard-earned ducats and time and energy shooting my own set of images in the real world? Images that are, in the end, admittedly, digital. But why bother going through all of that when there's just no practical reason to? And you know my answer is, because I wanted to. I just wanted to do the thing myself. I wanted to collaborate with other human beings. I wanted that experience, and I wanted to use my hands and my creativity, what there is of it, just because I wanted to. Now, there are times when I do just go to Midjourney and punch in a prompt and grab an image to use somewhere or do something with. But I think that this might be the promise of the future. Well, I guess I should say potential promise. Humans are more and more becoming able to do things just because they want to. Obviously, there is all kinds of caveats to that, and no, it's never going to be quite that simple. But it is, at the very least, interesting. And interesting, to me, is interesting. Anyway, it's just a thought. And yeah, I did steal that from Bo of the Fifth Column. Good artists borrow, great artists steal. Someday I'll tell you about how I messed up real bad on a commercial shoot starring Halle Berry. Until then, go do something just because you've always wanted to. See ya. Oh, and Merry Christmas.